What happens when a simple plumber is pulled into the most mysterious and dangerous job of his life? A job that will make him question everything he thought he knew about himself. Can he fix the pipes, or will he drown in the chaos of his own fears? This is the story of a man who learns that sometimes the hardest thing to fix is the heart. Stay tuned to see how Jake fights for his peace, and trust me, you'll want to watch till the very end. Oh, and don't forget, if you've enjoyed the twists and turns so far, hit that subscribe button. Let's make sure you never miss a story that'll leave you questioning what's real and what's possible. You won't want to miss what comes next. Fixing Hearts and Faucets. The sun was setting over the quiet suburban neighborhood. The warm, golden light reflected off the polished windows of the grand houses. Jake adjusted his tool belt, preparing for another typical day as a plumber. But today, something felt different. He stood at the gate of a mansion, a house so lavish it almost seemed out of place in this neighborhood. The manicured lawns stretched out before him, perfect in every detail. A call had come in earlier that morning, an emergency with the pipes. Nothing unusual for a plumber. But the house, it looked too pristine, too perfect. He rang the doorbell, the sound echoing through the silence. The door swung open with a soft creak. Standing there was a woman, her beauty almost surreal. She smiled, but her eyes held something else. Something he couldn't quite place. "You're the plumber, right?" she asked, her voice smooth as silk. "Yes," Jake replied, nodding, trying not to stare. She led him inside, the cool air inside the house hitting him like a wall. The scent of fresh flowers mixed with a faint hint of something clinical. He followed her down a long hallway, the walls lined with expensive art. His boots clicked on the polished hardwood floors, each step echoing in the vast silence. They reached a grand bathroom at the end of the hallway. It was a masterpiece. A marble sink sat against one wall, the faucet gleaming under the soft light. She turned to him, her eyes flickering to the sink. "The pipes are backed up," she explained, her tone almost too casual for the situation. Jake nodded, setting his tools down. As he bent over the sink, he couldn't help but feel the weight of her gaze on him. It wasn't the kind of gaze you expect from a customer. It felt personal. He worked quickly, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling creeping over him. But as he twisted the wrench, something strange happened. A loud clink echoed from within the pipes, like something had broken loose. He froze. A chill ran down his spine as the water started to drain, but not normally. It swirled faster than it should, as though it had a mind of its own. Jake's heart rate quickened. The air around him seemed to grow colder, and the once inviting bathroom now felt like a tomb. He glanced up to find the woman standing behind him, closer than before. Her smile had faded, replaced by something darker. Something that sent a shiver through his entire body. Before he could react, the pipes let out a deafening bang, causing him to jump back. Water surged from the faucet, spraying across the bathroom in a violent burst. He stumbled, eyes wide, as the room flooded with the sound of rushing water. The woman did not move. She stood there, watching him, as if this was all part of the plan. Jake tried to steady himself, his heart pounding in his chest. What was happening? He reached for the pipe, but before he could touch it, the bathroom lights flickered. Then, the room plunged into darkness. A heavy silence followed. Jake's breath came out in short gasps as he fumbled for his flashlight. When the light flickered on, he turned back to the sink. And that's when he saw it. The water was no longer just water. It had changed, twisted into something unnatural. A dark, murky color that seemed to move with a life of its own. His stomach turned, and he stumbled backward, his mind racing. Then, the woman's voice broke through the chaos. "Do you know what happens when pipes get clogged, Jake?" Her tone was calm, almost soothing. He stared at her, unable to respond. She took a slow step forward, her eyes never leaving his. "I don't think you do." And in that moment, Jake felt the weight of something far more dangerous than a simple plumbing problem. The floor beneath him seemed to shift. The air grew thick, as if something was closing in around him. He turned, ready to run, but the door slammed shut with a force that shook the walls. His heart raced. Something was terribly wrong. He looked back at the sink, his eyes wide in disbelief. The water was no longer just swirling. It was reaching out, stretching toward him like a living thing. Jake's breath caught in his throat as the water began to move. No, it was more than just moving. It was reaching, creeping, pulling itself toward him in a way that was impossibly unnatural. The ripples were no longer caused by the flow. They had their own purpose now, a purpose that Jake could not understand, but one that filled him with an overwhelming sense of dread. The woman's gaze never wavered, her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that made his skin crawl. She took another slow, deliberate step forward, her presence closing in on him like a dark cloud. Why is this happening? Jake managed to choke out, his voice hoarse and shaken. He reached for the door handle, his hands trembling. But it was no use. The door was sealed tight, as if it had been locked from the other side. The house felt different now, the air thick with tension, as if the walls themselves were closing in. He glanced around the room, desperate for a way out, but there was no escape. The woman stood in his way, and the water, now rising at an alarming rate, began to encircle his feet. His heart hammered in his chest, every instinct screaming for him to flee, to run from whatever dark force was taking control of the house. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, as the water began to swirl around his ankles, cold and suffocating. The woman's lips curled into a smile, but it was the kind of smile that did not belong on a face of a human being. "It's not about me, Jake," she said softly, her voice like a lullaby, eerie and hypnotic. "It's about you. You've been chosen." Jake shook his head, confusion and terror flooding his mind. "Chosen," he repeated, his voice cracking. "Chosen for what?" Her smile deepened, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of something dark in her eyes. "You are part of something bigger, something you will never understand until it's too late," she murmured. Her voice seemed to echo in the room, bouncing off the walls in a way that made Jake feel as though the entire house was listening, waiting, closing in around him. The water rose higher now, the coldness seeping into his bones. He backed away, slipping on the slick floor, but there was nowhere to go. The bathroom had become a cage, and the woman was the key holder. "I don't understand." "I'm just a plumber," Jake stammered, his heart racing. "I was just doing my job." The woman laughed, a soft, almost sad sound. "And that's exactly why you're here. You think this is just about pipes? About fixing things?" Jake swallowed, his throat dry as sandpaper. "I don't know what you mean," he said, his voice a mix of fear and confusion. The woman's eyes softened for a moment, but the flicker of humanity quickly faded. "It's about broken things, Jake. Broken people. Broken lives," she whispered. She took another step forward, the water now reaching his knees. Jake felt the cold seeping through his clothes, the chill biting into his skin. His hands shook as he grabbed the edge of the sink, trying to steady himself. The woman's voice was almost a chant now, rhythmic and hypnotic. "You've come to fix things, haven't you? But you're not meant to fix this. You're not meant to fix me." Jake's breath hitched. He could feel the tension in the room tightening, like a noose around his neck. "Fix you," he repeated, his voice breaking. "I don't know what you're talking about." The water reached his waist now, the cold unbearable, the pressure building, suffocating. The woman was only inches from him now, her smile unnervingly calm. She reached out, her hand grazing his arm as she whispered, "You can't fix a heart that's already broken." Jake flinched at the touch, as if her skin were made of ice. The words hung in the air, heavy, suffocating. He had to get out of there. With all the strength he could muster, he turned, lunging for the door. But the water exploded upward in a violent rush, pushing him back. He stumbled, falling into the sink, his body crashing against the hard porcelain. His heart pounded, each beat louder than the last, but the woman was there, standing over him, her eyes filled with an intensity that threatened to swallow him whole. "You can't run, Jake," she whispered. "You can't escape. Jake gasped, scrambling to his feet, his hands gripping the edge of the sink. But no matter how hard he tried, the water kept rising. The cold was unbearable now, creeping up his chest, his neck. The house was no longer still. It seemed alive, breathing, pulsing with something dark and dangerous. The woman stepped closer, her voice now a low hum. "You wanted to fix things, but you didn't realize that sometimes some things are meant to stay broken." Jake's chest tightened as he looked around, desperate for a way out. But the walls were closing in, and the woman's presence was a suffocating weight on his soul. "Please," he gasped, his voice barely audible as he fought to keep his head above the rising water. But the woman just smiled. "All the water in the world won't fix what's inside of you, Jake. You can't run from what you really are." Her words hit him like a blow, a punch to the gut. Jake's head was spinning. His legs were numb. The water rose higher, reaching his chin now, and with it, a sense of hopelessness. The room seemed to tilt, the walls warping, shifting as though they were breathing along with him. Everything was closing in on him. His heart was pounding so loudly in his ears that he could barely hear the woman's voice anymore. But it didn't matter, because the cold had taken over, and all he could feel was the suffocating weight of her words, her presence, and the rising water. And in that moment, Jake knew. There was no escaping this. He was part of something far bigger than he could ever have imagined. A part of something dark and unforgiving, and no matter how much he struggled, it was already too late. Jake's heart raced wildly in his chest as the water continued to rise, inch by agonizing inch. The cold had become unbearable, sinking into his bones like an endless winter. He gasped, trying to push himself to his feet, but his limbs felt as if they were made of lead. The house was alive, the walls shifting with an unnatural pulse, the very air humming with something dark and oppressive. But then, just as he was about to lose hope entirely, a strange thought struck him. "Wait a minute. I'm a plumber. I fix things. That's what I do." A shaky laugh bubbled up from deep within him. It was absurd. Here he was, drowning in a strange, supernatural nightmare, and somehow, the only thing he could think of was his job. His stubborn, never give up, I'll fix it mentality. He could almost hear his old mentor, Earl, in his head, lecturing him about how no problem was too big if you just knew how to approach it. "Jake, my boy, you don't fix a leak by just patching it up. You need to understand the system, the way things flow." It wasn't the most profound advice, but in that moment, it felt like a revelation. Taking a deep, steadying breath, Jake wiped his wet face with a trembling hand. The water was now at his chest, but instead of panicking, something clicked inside him. This wasn't just about fixing pipes. This was about understanding the system. The house. The woman. The water. Everything had a rhythm to it, a pulse. He had always been good at reading things, the way pipes worked, the way leaks showed up in the most inconvenient places. It was all a puzzle, a problem to be solved. And that's what he did. He solved problems. Jake glanced up at the woman, who was watching him with an eerie, calm gaze. There was something in her eyes now, something flickering, as if she had just realized he wasn't the scared little plumber she thought he was. "Do you understand now, Jake?" she asked softly, her voice low and almost mournful. "I understand more than you think," he replied, his voice growing steadier with each word. He took another deep breath, his eyes narrowing as he focused on the water swirling around his feet. It wasn't just water, it was a barrier, a test, something meant to drown him, to trap him. But if there was one thing Jake knew about plumbing, it was that when something was blocked, you didn't just push harder. You understood the flow, found the source, and broke through the blockage. With sudden clarity, he realized what he needed to do. The house, the pipes, the woman, they were all part of the same system. And if he could just find the right balance, the right rhythm, he could fix it. He pushed against the rising water, moving toward the sink. His hands were cold, but his mind was sharp. He didn't just need to repair the pipes. He needed to repair the flow, restore balance to everything. "All right," Jake muttered to himself, a slight grin tugging at the corners of his lips. "Let's see if I still got it." The woman tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "What are you going to do, Jake?" she asked, her voice dripping with mockery. "You're trapped here. You'll drown like the rest of them." Jake glanced back at her, the grin widening. "You think I'm going to drown? I'm a plumber. I don't drown. I fix." With that, he turned to the sink and twisted the faucet, his hands working quickly. The water surged up around him, threatening to overtake him, but Jake wasn't giving in. He remembered Earl's voice again, the old man's stubbornness echoing in his mind. "You don't fix a leak by patching it, Jake. You fix it by understanding it, by finding the root of the problem." Jake's fingers tightened around the faucet. The water wasn't just a problem to be solved, it was a message, a challenge. With a deep breath, he turned the wrench in his hand and forced the pipe open. There was a loud pop, the kind of sound you hear when a stubborn clog finally gives way. The room trembled. The water, once swirling ominously, started to reverse its course. The once overpowering flow slowed, the chill easing from his limbs as the pressure lifted. For a moment, everything was still. And then, the woman spoke, her voice trembling now, no longer confident. What have you done?" Jake stood there, soaked to the bone but grinning like a man who had just won the lottery. The water had stopped rising, the strange, oppressive feeling in the house lifting as if someone had switched off a dark, hidden switch. "I've fixed it," he said simply. "Just like I always do." The woman took a step back, her face pale now, her eyes wide with disbelief. "But I was going to break you. You were supposed to fall into the same trap as all the others." Jake shook his head, stepping away from the sink. "Well, you're a little off, sweetheart. See, you might have thought you had me figured out. But no one can trap a plumber in their own game. We fix things. And sometimes fixing things means standing up, even when the whole house is falling apart around you." There was a long pause. The woman seemed to waver, the sinister air that had once filled the room now dissipating. Jake stood tall, his body still trembling from the cold, but his heart strong. He had faced the impossible and come out on top. You can't break someone who's already broken and put back together 1,000 times over, Jake added, a little chuckle escaping his lips. "Trust me, I've seen worse leaks than whatever you've got going on here." The woman stared at him, her expression unreadable for a moment, before her lips curled into a slow smile. It wasn't the same smile as before, cold and distant. This one was softer, almost understanding. "Maybe you're right, Jake," she whispered, her voice no longer menacing. "Maybe I needed someone to fix the thing I couldn't fix myself." Jake smiled back, his heart lighter now than it had been in what felt like a lifetime. "Yeah, we all do sometimes." As the woman disappeared into the shadows of the room, leaving Jake standing in the now quiet bathroom, he couldn't help but feel a sense of peace settle over him. He had fixed the pipes, yes. But more than that, he had fixed himself. Because sometimes, the toughest problems aren't the ones you fix with a wrench. They're the ones you fix by never giving up, by trusting yourself, and by realizing that you've got everything you need inside you to overcome anything life throws your way. Jake laughed softly to himself as he grabbed his tools. The house was silent now, but he wasn't scared anymore. In the end, it was all about understanding the flow. And Jake? He had mastered that long ago. As Jake stood there, surrounded by the eerie stillness of the mansion, the faintest sound of water dripping echoed in the background. His heart, still racing from the rush of adrenaline, began to slow. The woman, who had once seemed like a force of nature intent on dragging him into the depths of her mystery, was gone now, fading into the shadows of the room, leaving behind only the lingering taste of fear mixed with something else. Something almost familiar. Jake wiped his face with the back of his hand, his fingers still numb from the cold, but his mind was racing. Had he really just done it? He'd faced a situation that, by all accounts, should have drowned him. Yet here he was, standing tall, heart still beating, mind still intact. He had fixed it, yes. But there was something deeper to what he had just experienced. Something far beyond the pipes and the water. What just happened here? A shiver ran down his spine as he took a slow, careful step back, almost expecting the woman to suddenly reappear. But the room remained still, the oppressive energy that had once filled the air now replaced by a quiet, almost serene calm. Jake let out a breath, half laughing at himself. A plumber. In a haunted mansion. Fixing pipes like it's another Tuesday. And yet, something inside him had shifted. The man who walked in here this morning was no longer the same. He had faced a literal flood, his entire world had been consumed by it, and yet he had risen above it. He had fixed it. Not just the pipes, but himself. He glanced around the now silent bathroom. The water, which had once threatened to pull him under, had receded, leaving nothing behind but wet floors and a faint scent of dampness that clung to the air. Everything looked normal now. Too normal. Normal. That's it, Jake thought. I came here expecting chaos, and chaos I got. But in the end, everything I needed was right here. In my hands. In my mind. I just had to trust myself. With a deep sigh, Jake took a step toward the door, but then stopped. He felt it, a sensation, a pull, something drawing him back into the room. His eyes flickered to the sink, where the water had been moments ago. There was something there, something almost imperceptible, but he could feel it. A slight shift in the air, a faint whisper of something unfinished. Turning back, he crouched down by the sink, his fingers brushing the edge of the porcelain. For a moment, nothing happened. The house was silent, too quiet. And then, as if on cue, a soft sound echoed from the depths of the pipes. It was faint at first, barely noticeable, but it was there. A click, followed by a gentle gurgle, as though the house itself had exhaled a breath. Jake's eyes widened. He stood up quickly, scanning the room for any sign of movement. But there was nothing. The water had stopped swirling, the pressure had been released, but that sound, that faint noise from the pipes, it was a warning. Or was it? The man who had walked in here just a short time ago had felt small in the face of the unknown, drowning under the weight of fear. But now? Now he felt something else. He felt empowered. Invincible, even. For the first time in what felt like forever, Jake smiled. He knew exactly what he needed to do next. He had to confront the source. He wasn't going to let fear control him anymore. He wasn't going to let anything control him. This house, this woman, the water, all of it had been a test. But tests didn't break him. They shaped him. They revealed him. And he was ready. The water had been a metaphor, a mirror to his own struggles. He'd spent so long trying to fix things for everyone else, burying himself in the day-to-day grind, never taking a moment to stop and truly understand his own emotions, his own fears. Now here he was, standing in a mansion, facing something impossible, and yet he had come out on top. Jake stood tall, his hand still on the sink, his thoughts sharp and clear. "I fixed it," he muttered again, almost as a mantra. "I fixed it." The room seemed to hum in response, as if it understood him, as if it was waiting for him to fully realize what he had done. The door creaked open behind him, and he spun around, his heart jumping. But it was only the wind, the old house settling in its foundations. He let out a breath and turned back to the sink. But before he could take another step, he heard a voice. This time, it wasn't the woman's voice, but something different, deeper, more primal. It was as if the house itself was speaking. "Are you sure you fixed it, Jake?" The voice was low, almost a whisper. Jake's spine straightened as he turned, scanning the room once more. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, but this time, he wasn't afraid. This time, he wasn't backing down. "I don't know what's going on here," Jake said, his voice strong. "But I do know this. I've faced worse than this. I've fixed worse than this. And I'm not running anymore." The room was silent. The voice seemed to fade, and for a moment, Jake wondered if he had imagined it. But deep down, he knew he hadn't. He turned back to the sink, his mind clearer than it had ever been. The pipes, the water, the house, it was all connected. It wasn't just about fixing broken things. It was about understanding the flow. "I've got this," Jake said aloud, the words filling the room. "I know exactly what I'm doing now, and nothing is going to stop me." The water was gone. The fear was gone. And what was left was Jake, a man who had just realized something life-changing. He wasn't just a plumber anymore. He was a man who could fix anything. The world may be filled with chaos, with broken things, with challenges that seem impossible. But if you can understand the flow, if you can trust yourself to face the obstacles head-on, there is nothing you cannot fix. Jake smiled to himself as he stepped toward the door. The world was waiting for him, and he was ready. He had fixed the pipes. He had fixed the house. And most importantly, he had fixed himself. The journey had only just begun. And with that, Jake walked out of the mansion, the door closing gently behind him. Jake stood in the doorway for a long moment, his hand resting on the cool brass doorknob. Outside, the world was quiet, but he knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Not for him. Not after what he'd just experienced. The eerie mansion behind him had begun to fade into the distance, its looming presence shrinking as he walked down the long path toward his truck, parked just beyond the driveway. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a pale light over the trees that swayed gently in the night breeze. But for some reason, the world felt lighter, calmer. It was as if the air itself had been cleared, and with every step Jake took, he felt more alive, more at peace. But that voice, the one that had spoken in the house, still lingered in his mind. "Are you sure you fixed it, Jake?" It echoed in his ears, as if the house itself had left him with one final question. He stopped halfway to his truck, the sound of his boots crunching on the gravel as the chill of the night air hit his face. He took a deep breath, inhaling the coolness of the world outside, trying to shake off the feeling that there was something he still hadn't fully understood. Jake's mind kept racing, turning over every moment of the night. The strange woman, the rising water, the way everything had seemed so impossible. But then the shift came, and he had felt it deep down. He had tapped into something within himself, something he didn't even realize was there. And in that moment, as the house seemed to exhale, as the floodwaters receded, Jake knew he hadn't just solved the problem in front of him. He had solved something inside himself. He chuckled softly to himself, shaking his head. "Man, I really need to stop taking plumbing jobs like this." It wasn't even the job that had been tough. It was what he had learned about himself. Jake had always seen himself as just a guy with a wrench, a man who could fix leaky pipes and clogged drains. That was what he did, and he was good at it. But what he hadn't realized until now was that life itself had been a much larger puzzle, one that required more than just the right tools to fix. He remembered the woman's words again. You can't fix a heart that's already broken. She had meant it as a challenge, as an obstacle in his path. But Jake knew something she didn't. He knew that every crack, every break, every failure was part of the journey. It wasn't the breaks that defined you, it was how you put yourself back together. And sometimes, the cracks let the light in. As he reached the truck, Jake paused. He had the sudden urge to look back at the mansion. Maybe he was imagining things. Maybe it was the exhaustion finally catching up with him. But something about that house, something about the darkness still lingered in the back of his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was one more lesson to be learned here. Don't get soft, he thought. You're a plumber, not some spiritual guru. But that voice, that question, still echoing in his mind, wasn't going away. He opened the truck door and climbed inside, starting the engine with a low roar that broke the silence of the night. As he pulled out of the driveway, he glanced once more at the mansion. The windows were dark now, the house eerily quiet. It almost looked abandoned, empty. But he couldn't shake the feeling that it was waiting for something, waiting for someone else. And then, just as suddenly as the thought appeared, it vanished. He was overthinking it. He needed to focus. He had a job to do. He had a life to get back to. There were other pipes to fix, other calls to answer, and he wasn't about to get sidetracked by something he couldn't explain. Jake turned his attention to the road, driving down the empty street as the landscape unfolded around him. The night was still, the headlights of his truck cutting through the darkness. He thought about the life he'd been living, the routine, the work, the constant striving to fix things for everyone else. He had always been focused on the small problems, the day-to-day grind. But what had happened tonight had changed him. Fixing things wasn't just about plumbing. It was about perspective. His grip tightened on the steering wheel as he realized the truth in that thought. He had been so focused on external problems, the leaks and cracks, that he had failed to look at the bigger picture, the one inside himself. He had been letting life's challenges break him instead of teaching him. But that night, that crazy night in the mansion, he had learned to see things differently. The road stretched ahead, and Jake's heart began to slow, but it wasn't just from the drive. He wasn't scared anymore. He had faced down fear, faced down the unknown, and he had come through stronger. He didn't need to be anyone else. He didn't need to be perfect. He just needed to be Jake. The moonlight reflected off his rearview mirror as he took a sharp turn, his truck's tires gripping the road with confidence. He felt it, something inside him had shifted for good. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat, a reminder of the work that still awaited him. He glanced at the screen. A new job request. But before he picked it up, he paused. The job could wait for a moment. Tonight, for the first time in a long time, Jake allowed himself to just breathe. For years, he had been fixing other people's problems, but tonight, he had fixed himself. And that was priceless. He chuckled to himself again, this time louder, with more warmth. You know, maybe I am a spiritual guru, he said to the empty truck cab. And as he drove off into the night, there was no fear in his heart, no self-doubt. Just a man who had finally understood what it meant to face life's floods and to fix them, not with tools, but with heart. The next morning, Jake woke to the sun peeking through his window, the promise of a new day stretching out before him. He rolled out of bed, his body sore from the night's strange adventure, but strangely invigorated. He made his coffee, strong and black, and as he sat down at his kitchen table, his mind felt clearer than it had in years. For the first time, he wasn't rushing. He wasn't just looking for the next job, the next fix. He was taking his time, savoring the quiet, enjoying the moment. Jake took a sip of his coffee and smiled. It was a brand new day. And he was ready, not just for the next job, but for everything life would throw at him. Because, after all, life's greatest fixes didn't come from tools. They came from within. And Jake? He was a master of fixing what mattered most. The morning sun was warm as it streamed through Jake's kitchen window, casting soft golden rays across the cluttered countertop. The comforting aroma of coffee filled the air, but beneath the warmth, Jake's mind churned with the quiet intensity of the events that had unfolded just hours before. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was still unresolved. What was that all about? He wondered, his eyes briefly flitting to the truck keys resting on the table. He had fixed the pipes. He had faced his fear. And yet, there was a lingering question that gnawed at him, a nagging sense that there was more to be discovered, more to be learned. He had spent years fixing broken pipes, but this wasn't just about the pipes. That mansion, that woman, everything had been a test of his resolve, of his ability to face the things inside him he had long buried. What was it that had drawn him into that strange encounter? Why had the house, with all its dark energy, seemed to recognize him? Shaking his head, Jake stood up, a small, determined smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He wasn't going to let his mind wander back into the darkness. Today was a new day, and he was going to keep moving forward. He didn't need to dwell on the strange encounter. He just needed to get back to what he did best. Jake grabbed his phone and glanced at the new job requests that had come in overnight. His finger hovered over one of them, a small plumbing issue just down the street. Perfect. It was exactly what he needed, a simple, straightforward task to get his hands dirty and clear his mind. But as his eyes scanned the message, something caught his attention. A name. It wasn't just any customer. The address listed was eerily familiar. It was the same mansion from the night before. He froze, the phone slipping from his hands and clattering onto the table. No way, he muttered under his breath, staring at the screen, trying to make sense of it. The house he had just left, where everything had happened, where the water had nearly drowned him, where that woman had, whatever that was now calling him back. His pulse quickened, and a strange chill ran down his spine. His gut twisted in a knot. Jake stood up quickly, grabbing his jacket. The thought of returning to that house filled him with dread, but there was no mistaking the feeling deep in his chest. The unfinished business from last night, it wasn't done. He couldn't just leave it behind. A sense of urgency settled in as Jake jumped into his truck and sped down the road. The familiar sights of the neighborhood whizzed by, but they felt distant now, surreal, as if he were entering another world entirely. The mansion loomed ahead, the silhouette of its towering structure standing tall against the early morning sky. As he pulled up to the long driveway, his stomach tightened. He couldn't help but remember the terror he'd felt when the water had risen, when the house had seemed alive, when the woman's presence had felt suffocating. And yet, despite all that, there was a strange pull to return. Maybe it was because he knew the answer was there, buried beneath all the fear, beneath the walls and the pipes and the mysteries. The house had challenged him, but it had also given him the strength to see beyond the surface. Jake parked and stepped out of the truck. He glanced up at the mansion one last time before he walked up the front steps, the weight of what lay ahead heavy on his shoulders. The door creaked open before he even had the chance to knock. Standing in the doorway was a man. Not the woman this time, but a tall, broad-shouldered figure in a dark suit. His eyes were hidden behind dark sunglasses, but his presence was just as unsettling as the woman's had been. "You came," the man said, his voice low, almost mechanical. There was something strange about the way he spoke, like the words were rehearsed. Jake stood frozen in place for a moment. "What the hell is going on here?" Jake started, but the man stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. Jake didn't have much of a choice, so he walked inside. The house felt colder than it had the night before. The walls were silent, as though the house itself was watching, waiting for something. "Follow me," the man said, leading him down the hall, his footsteps echoing off the marble floors. Jake's mind raced as they moved deeper into the house. The strange energy from the night before hadn't faded. It had only grown stronger. Every step he took felt heavier than the last, and the air seemed to grow thicker with each passing moment. They reached a large, open room at the end of the hall. The man stopped and motioned for Jake to enter. Jake hesitated for a moment, but then he stepped forward. The room was vast, filled with ornate furniture and chandeliers that seemed far too grand for a house this size. And then, there she was, the woman. She was standing by a large window, her back to him, staring out into the garden. "Jake," she said, her voice soft but with an undeniable authority. "You're here." He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. His body tensed, his instincts screaming at him to leave. But his feet were frozen in place. "I see you've come back to finish what you started," the woman continued, her tone almost sympathetic. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he took a step forward. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice shaking despite his best efforts to stay calm. "What do you want from me?" The woman turned to face him, her eyes dark but oddly gentle. "It's not about what I want, Jake," she said softly. "It's about what you need." "What I need?" Jake repeated, the words hanging in the air. "I don't need anything from you." She smiled, a small, knowing smile that sent a chill down his spine. "That's where you're wrong, Jake. You've always needed something. You just haven't known what it was." The room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in around him. His breath came faster, his pulse racing. "You've spent your entire life fixing things for others, for people who don't appreciate you," the woman said, stepping closer. "But you've never fixed yourself. You've never confronted the truth." Jake's mind spun, his thoughts a blur. He didn't want to hear this. He didn't want to be trapped in this house again, facing these strange, cryptic people. "You can run, Jake. You can fix the pipes, the faucets, and the drains. But what about you? What about your own brokenness?" she whispered. Jake's hands clenched into fists. His body trembled with a mixture of anger and fear. This wasn't about fixing pipes. It was about facing the parts of himself he had buried for years. The insecurities, the self-doubt, the failures he had never dealt with. "I'm not broken," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. The woman's smile softened. "Everyone's broken, Jake. Some just don't know it yet." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. He felt as if the ground was slipping beneath him. All those years of hiding behind tools, behind the work, behind the mask of being the guy who could fix anything. Was that his true self? Was he just running from the things he feared most? The weight of it all crashed down on him. But in that moment, something shifted. Jake didn't have to run anymore. He was ready to face it, ready to fix the things that mattered most. Not the pipes, not the leaks, but the heart. His own. Jake took a deep breath, his voice calm but firm. I'm not afraid of facing it. Not anymore. And in that declaration, the weight lifted. He had fixed the most important thing of all. Himself. As Jake stood in the middle of the grand room, facing the woman who had pulled him into this strange, labyrinthine world, something shifted inside him. Her words, haunting and cryptic, had shaken him to his core. But now, as he stood there, no longer the man he had been when he first entered this house, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't the same person. The weight that had burdened him for so long, the fear, the self-doubt, the constant need to fix everyone and everything around him, was gone. The house, the woman, the mysteries they presented, they had been nothing but a reflection of what he had buried deep inside. The brokenness, the confusion, the years of being afraid to confront his own pain. They had all led him here, to this moment, where he could finally breathe. The woman stepped closer, her eyes soft but knowing. She wasn't threatening him anymore. She wasn't even trying to control him. Instead, there was a deep sense of understanding in her gaze, as if she, too, had once stood where he was standing. Jake, she said softly, her voice filled with something that almost sounded like pride. You've done it. You've faced what most people run from their entire lives. You're free now. You fixed what needed fixing. Jake nodded slowly, his heart swelling with emotions he hadn't known he was capable of. The words, the struggles, the fear, it had all led him here, to this moment of clarity. He had fixed the pipes, yes. But he had fixed himself, too. Thank you, he whispered, though the words felt small compared to the gratitude in his heart. He didn't need her approval anymore. He didn't need anyone's approval. He was enough. The woman smiled, a warm, almost maternal smile. Go on, Jake. The world needs you now. Not as the man who fixes things for everyone else, but as the man who finally learned how to fix himself. Jake turned and walked toward the door, the weight of the house and its mysteries lifting off his shoulders with every step. The cold chill he had felt the night before had completely vanished, replaced with a warm, golden light that seemed to seep through the walls. As he stepped outside into the quiet morning, Jake took a deep breath, feeling the air fill his lungs. The world felt different now, brighter, clearer. It was as though he had been reborn, freed from the chains of self-doubt and fear. He didn't need to chase after approval anymore. He didn't need to be perfect. He just needed to be him, a man who could fix things, not just with tools but with his heart. Jake climbed into his truck, ready to leave the mansion behind. But just before he drove off, he paused. He looked back at the house, the strange mansion that had forced him to face his greatest fears. He smiled to himself. Maybe some things are meant to stay broken, and maybe that's okay. He drove off into the distance, leaving behind a world of uncertainty and stepping into one where he finally felt at peace. The road stretched before him, and with every mile, he felt lighter. A few months later, Jake was sitting in his small, cluttered office at his new plumbing business, reviewing the schedule for the day. He smiled to himself, feeling the satisfaction of a job well done. Not just the jobs on his list, but the job he had done on himself. The phone rang, and Jake picked it up, his familiar, easygoing voice greeting the caller. Jake's Plumbing, where we fix more than just pipes. How can I help you? The customer on the other end explained the problem with their sink, but Jake was distracted. A thought crept into his mind, and before he could stop it, the words spilled out. Before I help you out, make sure you hit that subscribe button, he said with a grin, making a motion like he was holding a wrench and pointing toward the phone. There was a brief silence before the customer chuckled. Subscribe? Jake, are you running a YouTube channel now or something? Jake laughed, his voice light and cheerful. Well, I've learned a lot lately. And maybe I'm fixing more than just pipes. So, if you want to hear more about my adventures, just remember to hit that subscribe button. Another chuckle from the customer, but then they said, I've been meaning to do that. I guess today's as good a day as any. Just make sure you keep those pipes in good shape, Jake. Jake grinned ear to ear. You got it. And I'll keep fixing things, pipes, lives, and maybe even a few more heart-to-hearts while I'm at it. Don't forget to subscribe, folks. You never know when a plumber might change your life. As Jake hung up the phone, he leaned back in his chair, chuckling to himself. He was content. He was happy. And in his own weird, funny way, he knew that the world was now a little bit better because he had finally learned to fix what really mattered. His heart. If you enjoyed Jake's journey, from fixing pipes to fixing hearts, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Whether you need a good laugh, some motivation, or just want to hear more about how life and plumbing sometimes intersect in the most unexpected ways, make sure to stay tuned. Because just like Jake, we're all in this together, and who knows, maybe we'll find the next adventure around the corner. So go ahead, subscribe now. Your heart and your pipes will thank you. Until next time, folks, keep it flowing.
End.